Okay, good morning. My room is covered in submachine guns, and the reason I'm doing it is because Joe and I are heading off overseas to Europe for 7 weeks. We go in 3 weeks. Security is always the big headache if you're a firearms collector, and when I disappear overseas or I go for any length of time, I take all the mechanisms out of all the guns. Now usually they are out anyway, or a component is out. I'm required by law to ensure that a mechanical component is removed from all collectible firearms and stored separately, so that if somebody breaks in, they're not getting away with a working submachine gun. So anybody who's been watching who may have been considering that it might be a good time to knock the house off, burglars, all the bolts, every pistol, every submachine gun, every machine gun, every assault rifle, every bolt action rifle, all the bolts and mechanisms are being removed, which is what I'm doing now, packed up into a lockable container, and that container is being removed elsewhere. So if you want to burgle us, all you'll be getting is tubes. So that's why I'm doing this. And I thought I'd make a video on World War II submachine guns, one hit, covering off all the ones that I have, once over lightly. Going to be missing out a lot of detail, but it just gives you an opportunity to see them side by side, which is perhaps a little unusual. At some point I might go back and do strip and assemble and the detailed vids, close-ups, etc., but this may suffice just for the moment. So that's that. Where do we start? Probably at the beginning. Let's talk about the beginning of the war and British SMGs. This is a Lanchester. Take that off for a second. A Lanchester submachine gun. At the beginning of the Second World War, the Brits had no submachine guns in service. Obviously they encountered the German army with the MP-38 in France. Once they got their butts kicked off the beaches of Dunkirk, they recognised that they had abandoned pretty much all their heavy equipment, including most of their Bren guns. So, being completely paranoid about German paratroopers dropping onto England as part of Operation Sea Lord, they went to a design that was already existing, an example of a submachine gun that they already had to hand, which was I think it was the MP-28, German MP-28, and they basically copied it. It was intended for service, not only with the Army and the Home Guard, but also, more importantly, for the Royal Air Force, for airfield defence against paratroop envelopment. So they grabbed the MP-28 and effectively they just copied it. Now the thing is with the interwar guns, submachine guns, they tend to be more complicated and they tend to have certain bells and whistles on them which you don't see on the war manufacturer. And this is really just an example of the designers trying to come up with a point of difference to the competition to try and attract buyers, military buyers. So you see a lot of unnecessary bells and whistles. The characteristics of this particular submachine gun, it's got wooden furniture, it's got precision high-grade metal, and there are a number of things as part of the manufacture which make it more complicated. There's some engineering and machining which is required that slowed things down and made life very expensive, which is why this submachine gun was supplanted by the Sten gun. They couldn't produce it in numbers and it was too bloody expensive. So what was produced ultimately filtered out. Some went to the Air Force, but most ended up with the Royal Navy. And this type of submachine gun, the Lanchester, you would have found in most of the British Commonwealth navies right up until the 1980s. They were cluttering up the arms codes. Standard 9mm blowback. It has a 30 or 50 round magazine. They have a 50 lying around somewhere. No safety catch, but a safety slot milled into the receiver, and we'll talk about that when we get onto the Sten gun. No selector switch. It's got a low enough rate of fire that you can get single shots away, no problem. The bells and whistles components are, it's got a ventilated barrel jacket, which is also ventilated around the end cap. So again, unnecessary and expensive. It has a brass housing, magazine housing. Again, brass pretty quickly becoming a strategic metal. The whole thing, as far as the stripping is concerned, is really easy. Just swing the catch around and the whole weapon hinges, you take the cap off and the guts fall out. Pretty good actually, if you're, particularly for the Navy guys who are using it when it's exposed to salt water, you can get right in and clean everything out. It's a nice submachine gun to fire. It's quite soft, it's controllable. The sights are reasonably precise. There's a flip sight and a foresight which is sort of semi-driftable. So you get a reasonably good sight picture. But again, overall, unnecessarily complicated, too expensive to manufacture. So what did they do? Well, just before I stop, they also, the British being British and demanding this sort of thing, they wanted it to be able to accept the service bayonet. So they put a bayonet boss on, and it will take the 07 Wilkinson bayonet, which you see is a bloody huge overall length. I've only ever seen one photograph of the thing being used, and that was some British sailors escorting German sailors that they captured. I can't remember if it was in the Bismarck or the Charlotte, one of the big ships. They pulled them out of the water and they're escorting them off the ship blindfolded, and the sailors are armed with these things, bayonets fixed. So, 1940s, the British are running up their own exhaust pipes, panicking about the imminent arrival of the Germans, and the Enfield people, along with Mr. Turpin, come up with probably the most important submachine gun of the Second World War. Important in terms of it was the trailblazer for the mass-produced, cheap and cheerful, massive use of stampings, weldings, sheet metal, which is the Sten gun. You would have seen the Sten gun number 1. It had some wooden furniture. It had a rather elaborate flash eliminator. That was all simplified, and we see this, which is the Mark II, manufactured all around the place. Canadians manufactured a hell of a lot of them. The Canadian butt is the skeleton butt. This is the tube butt, which you would have seen on the British guns, and the 10,000 Sten guns that were made here in New Zealand, believe it or not, by our railways department. It's a very, very simple weapon to manufacture, the most complicated component being the barrel itself. The IRA copied them, and as did the Germans. At the end of the war, they took the Sten gun and they manufactured their own version for use with the werewolves, the resistance stay-behind forces. Fortunately, that never came to pass. It's not a bad submachine gun. It really isn't. All the submachine guns do pretty much the same job to pretty much the same performance parameters. Designed for use at 100 metres and in. Not accurate. The rounds bleed energy too badly. It's a pistol round, so it's a close quarters point and squirt kind of firearm. The main problem with the Sten was not to do with the mechanism or the gun, it was to do with the magazine. The magazine is not very robust, and the area of vulnerability, and this is the case with all SMG magazines of the era, is the feed lips. If that's dropped on a hard surface and they get dented, you're going to have feed problems, you're going to have stoppages. It was a real issue with this type of mag, and the Brits used to basically grab a handful, test fire, and the magazines that didn't work they just threw away. The other problem with the particular type of magazine is its feed system. Although it's a double stack, it's a single feed. The rounds present themselves in 2 columns, and at the very top they get pinched off. So you've got one round presenting itself to be chambered. And this creates a bit of friction, a bit of pressure, and again, it's one of the things that contributes to the feed issues. The side-mounted magazine, the thought behind that being that it is easier for soldiers to get down in the prone position and stay low while they're firing. If the magazine's down, then you find that their body is pushed up and exposed into the line of fire. You can, with this type of gun, swing the entire magazine housing down. There's a plunger here that can be pulled out. It's a bit of a bugger to do. And the magazine housing can be slung underneath the weapon. The weapon won't function in this configuration, but it just makes it easier for stacking, storage and shipping, which is why they did it. Also, it's a de facto dust cover. If you're travelling on the back of a truck in the desert somewhere, contact's not imminent, you can swing the magazine housing down and keep the working parts free of dust, dirt, sand, etc. So, you know, not a bad idea. Stripping is a piece of piss. You just pull down on the butt, that comes off. There's an end cap which comes out with a spring. Pretty straightforward, simple wire gauge, and then from there you can get the guts of it out. The bolt is representative of most of the SMG bolts. It's heavy because it's a blowback principle. It has to chamber the round for a fraction of a second after ignition for the firing pressures to drop to a safe level, at which time the inertia is overcome with the spring, the bolt is overcome, and the bolt travels back and the firing cycle carries on. It has an extractor which is fitted, it's not rather than machined into the into the bolt and a fixed firing pin.